Welcome to Famous People, English Stories. Ready to level up your English? Here we learn through stories slow, clear, and fun. Listen, relax, and enjoy the journey.
Introduction. In this story, we follow the journey of Alina, a young woman who once struggled deeply with English reading. She wasn't confident. She felt lost, overwhelmed, and often invisible in a world where English seemed like a wall she could never climb. But something unexpected happened, something small but powerful. A single book changed her path forever. Through this story, you'll discover why English reading is not just a skill, but a doorway to confidence, expression, and global connection. As Alina learns to read, she begins to discover her voice. As her voice grows, her world expands. This is not just a story about learning English. It's a story about courage, persistence, and the life-changing magic of reading. So wherever you are on your own English journey, beginner, intermediate, or advanced, Alina's story will remind you, the most powerful stories don't just teach us words. They change who we become. Let's begin. Chapter 1: The Girl Who Hated Reading. Once in a quiet town, far from the big cities, lived a young woman named Alina. She was 22, full of dreams, and had a curious mind. But there was one thing she never liked: reading. Especially reading in English. She often told her friends, "Reading is boring. I learn better by watching videos." When someone gave her a book, she'd politely smile, take it, and put it on a shelf she never touched again. In school, she did just enough to pass English. She could speak a little. She could understand simple things. But reading? She avoided it. Her parents, both teachers, worried about her. They loved reading. Her mother used to say, "Books are like doors, Alina. Every time you open one, you enter a new world." But Alina didn't believe that. To her, English books felt like puzzles, too many words, too slow, and too difficult. After graduating from university, Alina began searching for work. She wanted to become a travel writer. Her dream was to travel the world, take photos, and share stories online. She applied to many places, but the replies were always the same: "We are looking for someone with better English writing skills." Or worse, no reply at all. Frustrated, she thought, "Why does everyone expect perfect English? I just want to tell stories." One evening, Alina sat in a small cafe, scrolling through her phone. She came across a job post that caught her eye. It was from a famous travel magazine. The title was bold: "Looking for a storyteller who sees the world differently." It was her dream job. Excited, she read the full post. But something stopped her. At the end of the post, it said, "To apply, please read the short English story linked below and send us your thoughts." Alina froze. It was only one page. But it felt like a mountain. She opened the link. The story was written in simple English. It was about a boy who traveled to the Arctic and found a polar bear stuck on an ice block. Alina read the first paragraph. Then the second. Her eyes moved slowly. She had to stop and reread. It took her 20 minutes to finish it. But something strange happened. She enjoyed it. The story made her feel something. Not just because of the polar bear, but because of the way it was told. The words were simple but powerful. The sentences were short, but they stayed in her mind. When she finished, she wasn't frustrated. She was surprised. She sat back, thinking, maybe reading isn't boring. Maybe I just never gave it a chance. That night, Alina didn't write a reply to the magazine. She didn't feel ready. Instead, she made a decision. She would begin reading in English. Not for a job. Not for school. But for herself. She went home, searched online, and found a website with free English short stories. The first one she chose was called The Secret Library. She read it slowly, underlining new words. She didn't understand everything. But she felt proud. For the first time, she was reading in English and liking it. Every day after that, she read one story. Sometimes it was a fairy tale. Sometimes a real story. Some days were easy. Others, she wanted to give up. But she didn't. She kept going. And slowly, her world began to change. Reading helped her understand more words. It made her writing better. It gave her new ideas. And most of all, it made her fall in love with English. Alina didn't realize it at first, but she had taken the first step on a new journey. A journey that would not only change her English, but change her life. She had discovered the secret: reading in English isn't just about learning words. It's about learning the world. Chapter 2: The Book That Changed Everything. A month passed, and Alina had read over 20 stories. She had created a simple routine. Every morning, after breakfast, she would sit by her window, open her notebook, and read for 30 minutes. She would write down new words, expressions, and sometimes copy whole sentences she liked. The girl who once said, "Reading is boring," was now collecting English sentences like treasures. But the real turning point came on a rainy afternoon. The streets were wet, and the sky was a dull gray. Alina visited a second-hand bookstore near her town's old train station. It was small, dusty, and quiet, like a secret waiting to be found. She wasn't looking for anything special. She just wanted to escape the rain. But fate had other plans. Inside the store, the owner, a kind old man with glasses too big for his face, welcomed her warmly. "Looking for something in particular?" Alina shrugged. "Just browsing." He smiled. "Well, books have a funny way of choosing their readers." She walked between the tall shelves, her fingers brushing against the spines. Most books were in her native language. But then, on the bottom shelf of the travel section, she noticed an English title, Wanderer's Journal, Tales from the Road. She picked it up. The cover showed a silhouette of a woman standing on top of a cliff, wind in her hair, looking over a vast ocean. Something about it spoke to her. She flipped through the pages. The writing was simple but poetic. The author, a woman named Julia Park, wrote about her travels across 20 countries. Each chapter was a short story about people she met, places she discovered, and lessons she learned. Alina couldn't stop reading. She bought the book. That evening, curled up in bed with a warm cup of tea, Alina began reading the first chapter. It was about a small village in Peru, where the author met an old woman who taught her how to weave. The story wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, soft, and full of feeling. The author's words painted pictures in Alina's mind. For the first time, Alina didn't feel like she was reading in a second language. She felt like she was living in that story. Page after page, chapter after chapter, something inside her opened. This wasn't just reading anymore. It was dreaming with eyes wide open. Over the next week, she read the entire book, twice. And on the last page, she found a small note from the author. To all dreamers, read to see. Read to feel. Read to become. That line stayed in Alina's heart. She copied it on a sticky note and placed it on her mirror. Every morning, she looked at it and smiled. Reading had become her mirror, a reflection of who she wanted to be. And it wasn't just about English anymore. Reading gave her confidence. It gave her a voice. When she spoke with others in English, she felt more fluent. When she wrote, her words flowed better. Her vocabulary grew without effort. She began noticing how writers used rhythm, repetition, and emotion to tell stories. Then, something unexpected happened. Alina started writing her own travel stories. At first, they were short. A paragraph or two about her visit to the lake, a funny moment on a train, or her memories from childhood. She posted them on a blog called Steps and Stories. Her grammar wasn't perfect, but her ideas were honest. People started to read them and leave kind comments. Your words made me smile. I felt like I was there. I love your writing voice. Those comments meant the world to her. And deep down, she knew, it was because she started reading. Reading showed her how others told stories. Reading taught her the music of the language. Reading helped her believe she had something to say. One day, she got an email. It was from the same travel magazine she had once dreamed of writing for. The one that had asked applicants to read a story and send a response. This time, they had found her blog. They wrote, "We've been following your stories. Would you be interested in writing a guest piece for our next issue?" Alina stared at the screen, unable to move. It felt unreal. She typed a reply with trembling fingers, "Yes. I'd be honored." And so, the girl who once hated reading in English, the girl who thought books were boring, was now writing stories in English for the world to read. She thought about the dusty bookstore. The book that changed her. The note that said, "Read to become." And she smiled. Reading didn't just improve her English. It gave her a life she never imagined possible. Chapter 3, From Reader to Storyteller. Alina stood in front of her mirror, brushing her hair as soft morning light spilled into her small room. The sticky note with the words "Read to Become" still clung to the corner of her mirror, a quiet reminder of the journey she had begun. That day, her article would be published in the magazine she had admired for years. She had written about a trip to the northern coast of her country, a place filled with colorful boats, quiet cliffs, and stories told by fishermen who had watched the sea all their lives. She had described not only what she saw but also what she felt. The salty wind, the rhythm of the waves, the laughter of children chasing seagulls. and she wrote it in English. She remembered how hard it was when she first began. Reading used to feel like carrying a heavy backpack uphill. Now, it felt like flying. Alina stepped outside with her notebook and sat at her favorite bench by the park. Her phone buzzed. A new message, "Your article is live." She opened the link, her heart pounding. There it was, her name, in bold letters at the top of the page, followed by her words. Thousands of readers from all over the world could now read her story. She read it again, slowly. Not to check for mistakes, but to remember where it all started. As she sat quietly, an older woman nearby noticed her and asked, "Are you a writer?" Alina smiled. "Yes, I think I am." The woman nodded. "I always admire people who can write. Words are powerful." Alina agreed. But she knew a secret many people didn't realize. Her words didn't come only from her. They came from others, writers she had read, voices she had listened to, characters she had met in stories. The more she read, the more her own voice grew stronger. She realized something important: we become the stories we read. Reading taught her not just grammar and vocabulary. It taught her rhythm, emotion, clarity, and confidence. She began to see English not as a wall to climb, but as a bridge to cross. Every story was another step forward. Every sentence she read made her braver. At night, Alina began rereading Wanderer's Journal. But this time, she didn't stop to underline words or look up meanings. She read for joy. And then, she began to write in the margins, notes, thoughts, ideas. She was having a conversation with the author. This, she thought, is what reading really is, a quiet, powerful exchange between one mind and another. Soon, Alina's blog started to grow. English learners around the world messaged her. They said things like, "I struggle to read too," or "Your stories give me hope." Some asked for advice. Others shared their own writing. And so, Alina started something new, a reading circle. Every week, she met online with a small group of people from different countries. They chose one short story in English, read it during the week, and discussed it together. Some were shy. Some had strong accents. Some made mistakes. But none of that mattered. They were reading. They were growing. One man from Turkey said, "I used to think English reading was only for school. Now I see, it's for life." A teenager from Brazil added, "I never knew reading could feel like traveling." And Alina? She sat there quietly, listening, smiling. She was once like them. Afraid. Uncertain. But reading had transformed her, not overnight, but page by page, chapter by chapter. One day, while reading a story together, someone in the group asked her, "Alina, how did you become so good at English?" She paused. "I didn't chase perfection," she said. "I just started reading, and I never stopped. Reading made me love English. And love made me learn." That night, she looked back at all the books she had read, all the words she had underlined, all the ideas she had written. And she whispered a silent thank you to every author, every story, every page that helped her become who she was now. She knew her journey was far from over. There were still thousands of stories waiting to be read, and even more waiting to be written. But she had found her purpose. She wasn't just reading to learn English anymore. She was reading to live it, to feel it, to share it. And in doing so, she had become something more. Not just a reader. Not just a writer. A storyteller. Chapter 4: A Library of Dreams. Alina stood before a large wooden door, her hand resting on the brass handle. Her heart beat with excitement. Behind that door was something she had dreamed about for months. And now, it was finally real. The space used to be an empty room at the back of her local community center. Dusty floors, peeling paint, forgotten chairs. But now, after weeks of planning, painting, and collecting, it had become something magical. A reading room. Her reading room. Inside were 2 bookshelves filled with English books, novels, short stories, travel memoirs, and even comics. There were beanbags, soft lighting, warm rugs, and a kettle in the corner for tea. On the wall, she had painted a quote, "Every reader opens a door to a new world." Alina opened the door and stepped in. The scent of old pages and new beginnings filled the air. This place wasn't for students. It wasn't for grades. It wasn't even about being good at English. It was about wonder. It was about giving people a quiet space to connect with words, with stories, and with themselves. She called it the Library of Dreams. Every Saturday afternoon, Alina opened the doors to anyone who wanted to read. Some were teenagers preparing for exams. Some were retired women looking for a hobby. Some were mothers who wanted to read before picking up their children. And others were just curious souls, like she had once been, who wanted to see what English reading could offer. Alina didn't teach grammar. She didn't test vocabulary. She simply offered a space. A beginning. People picked up books, sat down, and started reading. Slowly. Quietly. Some struggled through the first few pages, just like she once had. Some whispered translations to themselves. Some underlined words and wrote in notebooks. Others just closed their eyes after reading and smiled. They were discovering what Alina had discovered years ago, that reading is more than understanding, it's feeling. One day, a boy named Amir came into the room. He was 12 and shy. His teacher had told him he needed to practice more English, but he hated worksheets. Alina handed him a book of short mystery stories written in simple English. He looked at the cover and frowned. "This looks hard." Alina smiled. "Just try 1 page. You don't have to finish it." He sat by the window. For 10 minutes, he didn't move. Then he turned the page. Then another. 30 minutes passed. At the end, he looked up and said it wasn't hard. It was fun. That moment reminded Alina of herself at the beginning of her own journey. Each week, more people came. Alina started a reader's wall, where anyone could write the name of a book they finished and a short message about what they loved. The wall filled up quickly. I cried at the ending. I didn't know English books could make me laugh. This story felt like it was written just for me. One woman wrote, Reading made me feel young again. And Alina? She continued reading every day. But now, she also listened. She listened to the stories others told, to the struggles they shared, to the breakthroughs they celebrated. And she kept writing. She published more articles. She was invited to speak at online English learner conferences. Her blog was now read in over 20 countries. She wasn't famous. She wasn't fluent in the way textbooks described fluency. But she was real. Her journey resonated because it was honest, human, and filled with heart. Reading had opened her mind, expanded her vocabulary, and trained her ear to the rhythm of English. But most importantly, reading had taught her empathy. Because when you read, you live another life. And when you live more lives, you understand more people. Years later, Alina looked back at the girl who once thought reading was boring. Who thought English was too hard. Who believed her voice didn't matter. Now, that girl had helped hundreds of others find their voices too. The Library of Dreams had grown. There were now 2 rooms, more books, and even a tiny writing desk where people could try creating their own stories. Every corner held a whisper of someone's journey. And in every book, a possibility waited. Alina stood by the door one evening as the last reader left, their book tucked under their arm like a secret. She turned off the lights, looked back at the room, and smiled. Reading didn't just change her life. It allowed her to help others change theirs. Chapter 5: The Book That Changed Everything. The wind was crisp that morning, and golden leaves danced down the quiet street as Alina made her way to a small English bookstore she had passed many times but never entered. It was tucked between a bakery and a music shop, with a faded blue awning and an old wooden sign that read, "Turn the page." She pushed the door open. A tiny bell jingled. Inside, time seemed to slow down. The scent of paper and coffee filled the air, and shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, each filled with books that had crossed oceans and generations. It wasn't a big store, but every inch was alive with quiet possibility. Alina walked slowly, her fingers brushing the spines of unfamiliar titles. Then, in the back corner, she saw it. A book with a deep green cover and simple golden letters, The Silent Garden. She picked it up, opened to the first page, and started reading. She didn't realize an hour had passed. The story was about a girl who couldn't speak, but who heard everything. She listened to wind in the trees, footsteps in the snow, and laughter carried across lakes. Though silent, her world was full of sound and meaning. She noticed details others missed, and when she finally spoke, her words were powerful because they had been chosen carefully. Alina closed the book, deeply moved. That story mirrored something in her. She remembered the times she had struggled to find words in English, to say exactly what she meant. She remembered the silence of learning, of waiting, of wondering whether her voice would ever be enough. And here, in this book, was a girl who understood that silence could be its own kind of language. That afternoon, she bought the book and returned to her reading room. She placed it on the center table with a small card, recommended by Alina, a book that speaks quietly but deeply. The next week, a teenage girl picked it up. Then another. Soon, it became the most borrowed book in the library. One day, a quiet boy named Luca who rarely spoke in group sessions asked to keep the book for another week. He whispered, "It feels like it's about me." Alina nodded. It felt that way to me, too. This book, she realized, had done something magical. It had not only taught vocabulary or grammar, it had opened hearts. It had shown that English wasn't just about communication. It was about connection. Over time, Alina began writing a story of her own. Not a blog post. Not an article. A real story. A book. She called it The Listening Path, inspired by her reading journey and the people she had met along the way. It was a gentle guide for English learners, not about perfect grammar, but about learning through listening, reading, observing, and caring. Each chapter was filled with short stories, reflections, and personal tips. She wrote it in clear, simple English. Not simplified, but human. Warm. Encouraging. The book took her 2 years to finish. When it was done, she printed 10 copies and gave them to people from her reading circle. One by one, they read it. One by one, they wrote to her. I felt seen. This is the first English book I finished without stopping. Now, I want to write too. Those words meant more than any award ever could. Soon, small English groups in other towns asked for copies. A teacher in another country sent her a letter saying her students had used Alina's book in class and started their own reading journal projects. Alina was stunned. She hadn't set out to be a teacher, or a writer, or a reading advocate. She had just wanted to understand. But through reading, she had learned. And through learning, she had taught. Not in a classroom, but in a quiet, powerful way. One evening, Alina sat by her window with a cup of tea. The first copy of her book was in her lap. She flipped through it slowly, remembering the journey behind every page. From the girl who had once struggled to finish even a single article, to the woman who had written a book that helped others begin. She thought of all the stories she had read. And then she smiled. Because she knew her story was just getting started. Chapter 6: A Voice That Echoed. The conference room was quiet, except for the faint clicking of shoes on the polished floor and the soft shuffle of papers. Alina stood backstage, holding a small notebook. Her name was written on the event schedule in bold letters: Alina Mirovna, guest speaker, The Power of Reading in English Learning. She never imagined this day would come. A year ago, someone from an international English learning organization had read her book, The Listening Path, and invited her to speak. At first, she laughed. She wasn't a public speaker. She wasn't a professor or a scholar. But then the person said something that stayed with her: "We don't want a perfect English speaker. We want someone who understands the journey." So Alina had said yes. Now she stood behind the curtain, her heart pounding like a drum. She peeked through a small gap. Rows of chairs stretched before her, filled with English learners, teachers, volunteers, and curious minds from different countries. She clutched the notebook tighter. Then the host called her name. The applause was kind and warm, not loud, but steady. Encouraging. Alina walked to the center of the stage, took a breath, and looked at the sea of faces. Some smiled. Some looked nervous, like she had once looked when trying to understand English videos. Some held notebooks, ready to learn. Others just waited. She spoke slowly, gently. I used to be afraid of English. I thought reading in English was only for smart people, fluent people. Not for someone like me. She paused. People leaned in. But I was wrong. English reading is for anyone who wants to feel something new. To travel without moving. To learn without pressure. To be alone, yet not lonely. She told them about her first book, the article about the bookstore, and how reading changed how she saw the world and herself. She shared how stories gave her courage when speaking didn't. How books became her quiet friends. She looked around the room. You don't have to read fast. You don't have to understand every word. You just have to begin. One page. One paragraph. One feeling. She shared stories of Amir, Luca, and the silent impact of the silent garden. She spoke of how her little reading room had become a place of healing and how reading had helped others not just learn English, but believe in themselves. Reading in English didn't just improve my language. It gave me a voice. And that voice has carried me all the way to this stage. There was a moment of stillness. Then, applause. Not the kind that fades quickly, but the kind that stays. Like an echo. After the talk, people came up to her, some speaking fluently, others struggling to find the right words. But all were smiling. Grateful. Inspired. One young woman said, I haven't read a book in English in 2 years. Tonight, I'm going to start again. An older man said, thank you for reminding me that it's okay to go slow. And a student from Chile handed her a notebook filled with English phrases and drawings. I started this journal after reading your book. It changed my life. Alina held the notebook with trembling hands. She had never chased fame. She never wanted applause. What she wanted was something quieter, something lasting, a connection. And that night, she found it. Back in her hotel room, she sat by the window and wrote in her own notebook. Today, I stood in front of people and told my story. Not a story of perfection, but of progress. And it was enough. She closed the notebook and looked out into the city lights. Reading had once been a quiet act. Now, it had become a bridge. A mirror. A lamp in the dark. A song only some could hear, but those who did would never forget it. Alina's journey had taught her one final lesson. Stories don't belong to the person who writes them. They belong to everyone who reads them and finds a piece of themselves inside. And so, she kept reading. She kept writing. And her voice kept echoing, through pages, through people, through time. Chapter 7: A Library Without Walls. Spring returned to the city with its gentle winds and soft light. The streets, once blanketed in frost, now carried the scents of flowers and fresh paper as a new season of life began. In the heart of this awakening, Alina sat on the steps of her reading room with a notebook in hand and a thoughtful look on her face. The reading room was no longer just a corner in a local library. It had grown quietly, organically, into something much larger. Not in square footage, but in spirit. Letters began arriving from around the world. Emails from India, Brazil, Morocco, and the Philippines. Some were typed in perfect English. Others had grammar mistakes and spelling errors. But each one carried the same heart. They told her how one story helped a girl pass her exam. How another inspired a grandmother to learn English at 72. How a teenager, once ashamed of his accent, found confidence through reading aloud every night. Alina read each letter with care. And then, something shifted inside her. She realized her reading room didn't need 4 walls. It didn't need shelves or a checkout desk. It could be anywhere. Everywhere. She began designing a project called the Library Without Walls. The idea was simple but bold: bring reading to the learners, no matter where they were. Not textbooks. Not lessons. Stories. She gathered a team of translators, illustrators, and language teachers. Together, they created small digital books with slow, clear English. Each one came with audio, vocabulary notes, and a short reflection question. The stories ranged from simple tales about daily life to personal narratives about change, hope, and identity. The first book was titled The Window Reader. It was based on a boy she had met who watched the world from his apartment and dreamed of traveling but couldn't afford to. Reading became his passport. Within a month, 10,000 people downloaded the story. A teacher in a refugee camp in Jordan printed it out and used it in her lessons. A mother in rural Japan read it to her daughter each night. A college student in Nigeria shared it on a learning app with the message: English reading is not a skill. It's a light. Alina watched in awe. She never left her small city, but her words traveled farther than she ever could. Then came the invitations. A school in Vietnam asked her to speak. A podcast in Canada wanted her story. A European publisher offered to translate her books into 5 languages. But Alina remained grounded. She still took walks to the old bookstore. Still visited her reading room every week. Still met with her English learning circle in the park on Sundays, where people brought their journals and read aloud in small groups. There, under the open sky, accents didn't matter. Mistakes didn't matter. What mattered was that they read. Together. As learners. As humans. One day, a young girl approached Alina after a group session. She was quiet, with large brown eyes and a copy of The Silent Garden in her hand. "I want to write my own story," she whispered. "But I don't know where to begin." Alina smiled and handed her a small notebook. "Begin here," she said. "Begin with your heart." That moment stayed with her. Not because it was grand or dramatic, but because it was real. Just like her own beginning. From struggling to read one English article, to building a global community of readers. From fearing every unfamiliar word, to helping others find their own. Alina had come to understand something deeply important. When you read, you grow quietly, but the impact echoes loudly. And when you help others read, you don't just teach English. You give them courage. You give them a way to tell their story. A library without walls. A movement without noise. A journey without end. And so, Alina continued, one story at a time, one reader at a time, creating a world where no learner had to feel alone, and where every book opened not just a page, but a path. Chapter 8, Full Circle. Welcome to Famous People, English Stories. Ready to level up your English? Here we learn through stories, slow, clear, and fun. Listen, relax, and enjoy the journey. The train rattled gently through the countryside, fields of green rolling past like a living painting. Alina sat by the window, watching it all blur into soft shapes. A well-worn book lay open in her lap, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, a story she had once struggled to read years ago. Now, it felt like an old friend. She was on her way back to the village where it had all started. The invitation had come months earlier. Would you come speak to our school? Your story began here. We'd love for our students to hear it. Alina didn't answer right away. She read the message several times. There was a strange knot in her stomach, not fear, not doubt, but something more tender. A mix of gratitude and memory. She had left that village with broken confidence and shaky English. She had returned in her heart many times, through words and stories. But now, she would return in person. The school looked almost the same. The same yellow bricks. The same narrow hallways. But the faces were new. Younger. Wide-eyed. She stood in the small auditorium where she had once read her first sentence aloud in English, years ago. Back then, her voice had trembled. Her cheeks had burned with embarrassment. Now, as she stood before a crowd of students, teachers, and local families, her voice was calm and sure. I wasn't a brave girl, she began, looking into the rows of curious faces. I wasn't a fast learner. I didn't understand English movies. I didn't speak up in class. But I loved stories. And one day, I picked up a book that changed everything. She held up Anne of Green Gables, her very first English novel. Not because it was easy. It wasn't. But because I read it slowly, honestly, and with love. I learned to feel the language. To taste it. To live inside it. She walked them through her journey, her reading struggles, her lonely moments, the joy of understanding one new sentence at a time, the heartbreak of giving up and the beauty of starting again. Then she smiled and added, and now I teach reading in English. All over the world. Gasps filled the room. Whispers danced among the children. After her talk, a boy came up to her. His backpack was too big for his shoulders, and his hands were stuffed in his pockets. My brother says English is only useful for people who want to leave, he mumbled. Is that true? Alina knelt to his level. I used to think that too, she said. But reading English didn't help me escape. It helped me stay. Stay true to who I am. Stay open to people from everywhere. Stay strong in my dreams. The boy nodded, slowly. Later, she visited the village library. She ran her fingers along the spines of old books. Some she recognized. Some were new. And in the English section, to her surprise, was her own book, The Listening Path, with a stamp from the school. She touched the cover gently. In that quiet room, surrounded by whispers of learning, Alina felt something deeper than pride. It was belonging. She realized something powerful: you never really leave your beginnings. You carry them with you, like a seed inside your pocket. And one day, when the time is right, you return, not as the person who left, but as the one who grew. On her way back to the train station, a girl ran up to her. She was out of breath and held a notebook in her hand. "I started writing my own English story," she said. "Will you read it?" Alina smiled and took the notebook. "I'd be honored." As the train pulled away, she looked out the window at the fading outline of the village. It had once been a place of pain and silence. Now, it was a place of inspiration. A place where stories began. And though her journey had taken her across cities, countries, and cultures, it had all led back here. Full circle. Because when you read, you don't just discover books. You discover yourself. And when you share your story, you help others find theirs. Alina leaned back, closed her eyes, and whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." If this story inspired you, don't stop here. Choose a book. A short story. A paragraph. Read it slowly. Then read it again. Start a reading habit, even if it's just 5 minutes a day. And most of all, share this story with someone who needs it, someone who thinks English is too hard, someone who's about to give up, someone who doesn't yet believe in the power of their own voice. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories that help you learn English in a fun, natural way. Stories that lift you up, challenge you, and remind you why you started. And remember, every story begins with a reader. Let that reader be you. We'll see you in the next story.